Hi guys, Cade Wilcox here, host of the Primitive Podcast. On today's episode, we have the Chancellor of Texas Tech University, Dr. Ted Mitchell. What a phenomenal leader. Lots of really great truth shared in this episode. I can't wait for you to listen. Like me, I'm certain you're going to get a lot of value out of this one. Thank you for listening and following along with the Primitive Podcast. You're going to really enjoy this episode. So you've been in Lubbock about 10 years. Where did you come from? What were you doing prior to Lubbock? Did you wake up one day and decide you wanted to be a chancellor? Like, what does all that look like?
It's the craziest thing in the world. So I grew up in Longview in northeast Texas and spent all of my life in the eastern half of the state. So grew up in Longview, Texas, went to college at Stephen F. Austin, behind the Piney Curtain, went to medical school down at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston. I met my wife down there. She was a year behind me in medical school. And so stayed in Galveston for our training.
Okay.
Trained in internal medicine. And my interests were always in sports medicine. And so after we finished in Galveston, I moved to Dallas. There's a place in Dallas called the Cooper Aerobics Center, the Cooper Clinic. And the fellow that started it, Kenneth Cooper, is known as the father of aerobics. He's a physician, had done his preventive medicine training and his MPH at Harvard, but he's the one that is credited with starting the modern fitness movement. And so anyway, worked at the Cooper Clinic, started out as a staff physician and the medical director of the wellness program, an inpatient program there, and then worked my way up through vice president, and then eventually for the last several years I was the CEO of the Cooper Clinic. And while I was there, I had a patient, a crazy man from West Texas named Kent Hance.
Oh, gosh. No way.
Yeah, and so Hance and I are dear friends.
Okay.
And he called me and said, "Hey, Ted, would you mind serving on a search committee? We're selecting a search firm to look for a new president for the Health Sciences Center." And I told him, I said, "Well, Hance, I went to UT for med school, didn't go to Tech." He goes, No, we're looking for somebody from the outside." And so I was actually participating in the search for my predecessor at the Health Sciences Center. So I got a chance to meet a lot of the folks in the system and some of the board members and the like. And when Dr. Baldwin, who my predecessor at the Health Sciences Center, came out to Lubbock, there were some family issues that were going on with him. And for a number of reasons with him, it just never really worked out. And so I got a call from one of the folks that I'd served on the search committee with, and it seemed like it was no time later, but about a year and a half later, 2 years later. And she said, "Hey, we're going to be putting together a new search." And I said, "Hey, well, count me in. I'm happy to be on it." She goes, No. We want you to apply this time." So the whole thing was just,
wow.
I'd never thought about that one way or the other. Janet and I, at that point, we'd been at Cooper for almost 20 years.
Wow.
And so different challenge. And anyway, one thing led to another and wound up at the Health Sciences Center. Phenomenal people in West Texas, phenomenal people at the Health Sciences Center. And so was there for 10 years. And when things shifted at the system a few years back, and they asked me to step up as the interim chancellor, that was in August of 18. And then in October of 18 is when they appointed me the chancellor, permanent chancellor. And I kept the job at the Health Sciences Center because we were getting ready to go into a legislative session in 19. And the absolute worst thing you can do is have all kinds of turmoil during a session.
That makes sense.
So we stayed on through the session, and we worked very hard for the dental school in El Paso and for the vet school in Amarillo.
Okay.
And things worked out real well for us with that. And then as we got past the session and started looking toward the future, that's when I made the decision that the Health Sciences Center needed somebody full-time over there. The system needed somebody full-time. And so I made the decision to transition in October.
Okay. Was it a huge adjustment going from Dallas to Lubbock?
You know, it was, but having grown up in Longview, it was
more like Lubbock than it is
sure
Dallas.
Was, yeah. And so I'll tell you probably the thing that hit me the most when I was a kid growing up, watching all these westerns. You'd see all these cowboys riding around with dusters on and stuff, thinking, in Longview, Texas, you don't ride around in July with any kind of jacket on because it's hot and humid.
Yeah.
And so the climate was one of the things that was the most striking to me, because I had passed through Lubbock, but I'd only been to the city of Lubbock 2 times in my life.
Wow.
Once was to watch a football game, and once was to interview for med school. Okay. And that was it.
Yeah.
And so living out here and having those wonderful, wonderful nights, really, the first summer we were out here in 2010, tons of rain that summer. And I was cutting the grass and putting the gear up one night, and it had already gotten dark. And I remember walking out of the garage thinking, my gosh, I feel like I need some sleeves on or something. I've never had that in my life. That's never happened, ever.
That's great.
And I also remember thinking, I don't know what they say about West Texas being dry. It's raining all the time. I don't think it rained another drop for about 3 years after
that's right.
that.
Then we hit that
right
huge
into that drought. Exactly.
That's right.
But it's been absolutely wonderful.
That's great.
Both of our boys wound up going to Texas Tech.
Okay.
And our youngest actually had 2 degrees from Tech. The oldest had 1 degree from Tech. So I mean, it's been absolutely wonderful.
Where are they at now?
So Charlie is an engineer in Dallas.
Okay.
He's the oldest. We actually have a daughter that had started college right when we moved out here. She went to Alabama.
Okay.
And then she came back and she went to SMU to go to law school. And she's an assistant DA in Dallas.
Okay.
Charlie's an engineer in Dallas. And the baby, Chris, he majored in chemical engineering and in natural resource management, wildlife biology. So he just finished his master's at Villanova.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's great.
So,
wow.
but Texas Tech's been good to us.
Yeah, that's great. I have a question for you. So when you're recruiting faculty or staff or whatever it looks like, to Lubbock, what is your approach? I remember we had a young professional event here some time ago, and Coach Beard was the guest. And someone asked him, like, why Lubbock? How are you in Lubbock? And how's Lubbock going to keep you? And all this stuff. And he was kind of offended by it. It's like, why not Lubbock? And so it really struck me, just the way he responded. And someone in your position, I assume you're constantly selling the Texas Tech vision.
Of course.
And, fighting for that. So what's your approach there when you're casting that vision for someone who isn't used to Lubbock and West Texas and
Sure.
cotton fields and
Well, let me tell
lots
you,
of wind?
A lot of what I spend my time doing is talking to folks from West Texas who continually, and it's not downplaying West Texas, what you have in West Texas, there's a character trait out here that is phenomenal, but it works against you when you're doing PR. No braggadocio. No brag, just do the hard work. But as a consequence, people don't celebrate everything that we do out here. And I'll tell you where this becomes really, when you talk about quote unquote selling, Lubbock, it becomes the place that becomes most important for me as a university president and now as chancellor is in Austin during legislative session. Because what happens is, if you look at the area of West Texas that we draw from a lot, it's the westernmost 108 counties. So if you take a line and draw it from Oklahoma down through Dallas, Fort Worth, down through Austin, San Antonio, straight through the Rio Grande Valley, everything west of there is what we're looking at. It's an area that's larger. It's 49% of the state's geography. It's larger than 46 states in the United States. And yet, we only have about 15% of the population. And so when you go to Austin, and I noticed this during the first session that I attended in 2011, one of the things that you would get recurrently from elected officials, they would hear you about the importance of people doing things in rural America and rural Texas, this and that, but they would say, at the end of the day, when we have a limited budget, we have 85% of the population in the eastern half of the state. How can we justify spending large amounts of money on the western half of the state? And one of the things that you really want to make sure they understand is that, yes, we only are 15% of the population, but we're the breadbasket of the state. And if you look at the economy, now this is pre-coronavirus, if you looked at the Texas economy as a standalone economy, would be the 10th largest in the world. Our economy in the state of Texas is larger than the economy of Canada. And so that economy is based on 2 things, energy and agriculture, both of which are focused in West Texas. So we provide the food, the fiber, and the fuel, not just for the state of Texas, but to a large extent for the nation and even beyond. So one of the the pitches that I'm constantly making in Austin about this is, guys, listen, if you live in Dallas and you enjoy shopping at North Park, you better be thanking folks in Lubbock, because that's where the cotton's coming from.
Yeah.
If you live in Austin and you love going to the fancy restaurants there, you better be thanking folks in Amarillo, because that's where your beef's coming from. And if you like driving fancy cars in Houston, you better be thanking people in the Permian Basin, because that's where your energy's coming from. And once they hear that again and again and again, they start realizing the importance of this, the importance of West Texas. If you look then as far as selling Lubbock for folks that you're trying to recruit in, there is this intangible thing that if you can get them here and have them spend just a little bit of time, then they see how people interact with each other. And in fact, I think on the front end of it, especially in academia, where you have professors that have been around a lot of different places, they're almost a little incredulous. Like, really, are people really this nice?
Right.
I really can't believe that. But if you can get them to spend any amount of time here, the campus that we have is beautiful.
Yeah.
The people are about as nice as you'll meet anywhere. Texans in general are nice, and West Texans just a step up from there.
That's good. How do you view your role as a leader? I mean, I have to admit, I'm not real, knowledgeable in terms of how universities are structured and what's the difference between a chancellor and a president and all that stuff. So I'd be curious practically, it's like, what does a chancellor of a university do? And then second part of that question would be, how do you view your role as a leader, and how do you approach your leadership?
Sure. Well, to the first question, if you look at around the country in higher education, you have independent universities, both public and private, that are scattered around the country. And then you have some states where the universities fall under systems. California is a great example of a state that has university systems. Texas is a good example of a university with systems. So we have several systems, each of which is an umbrella organization for several universities. So in the Texas Tech University system, we have Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center, Angelo State University down in San Angelo, and Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center at El Paso. And during this next session, we're looking to add Midwestern State University to our family up in Wichita Falls.
Okay.
So the chancellor's role is at the system level, the way I look at it, is to provide a service to all of those universities, to go and work with each of the university presidents, work with their leadership, and to be the conduit for government relations, things of that nature, where I can take their needs and address them down in Austin.
That's good. That makes sense.
Now, my leadership style is I'm very, very much of a macro manager. To me, I'm always just looking for somebody that can come in and do a good job and then stay out of their way. When I was practicing in Dallas, I had a group that came through for examinations. Was this trucking company out of Oklahoma, and the owner of this company was a fellow that was in his 80s, had not even finished high school, but he had this national truck company, and he had a bunch of MBAs that worked for him. And I said to the fellow, I said, it's really, really nice for you to do this for your guys. He goes, oh, no, because I want to make sure they're in good shape. I work these guys. He said, the way you find a good executive, Ted? And I said, how's that? He said, it's like when you were a kid. You remember when you found an old car tire on the road? And so I'm waiting for the trucking analogy. And I said, yeah. He goes, well, as a kid, you kind of struggle to pick that tire up. But once you get it picked up, all you have to do is kind of point it the direction you want to go and then just tap it. And as long as you'll walk along beside it every now and then, stroke it a little bit, it'll go right where you need to go. And I thought, man, that's pretty wise.
Yeah.
So when you get good people working, and Texas Tech is filled, the entire system, filled with good people. And say, what are the things that you're trying to accomplish? What are the things from a system level that we want to accomplish together? And then let's go after it. It works beautifully.
Yeah, that's good. What did it look like when, you mentioned the coronavirus? Like, and I'm sure there have been other, challenges within, the institution that you have to address, but this is obviously a significant one and no real playbook. So when you started seeing that coming, how did you approach, getting your leaders together and beginning to formulate a plan? And if you don't mind being really practical,
sure.
What was your leadership approach, and what did you do to kind of start, creating a pathway forward? And how does an organization of your size and a leader like you manage a crisis and
Sure.
look at challenges like that?
So with the coronavirus, and you hit the nail on the head, this is not something anybody could have seen coming. And so if you go back, December 31st was when the first clusters in China were made known publicly. And the first American that was diagnosed in January was up in Washington State. And there was a period of 6 days from January 14th until January 20th that the reports are all saying during that 6-day period that was really, really crucial. China knew it had a problem and was trying to shut things down there, but it was being really kind of tight-lipped about it. So 3,000 people infected with the virus then headed worldwide. And so it sowed the seeds for things in northern Italy and in Taiwan and South Korea and northwestern United States. So all this stuff started, when it started rolling out, by the end of January, and I think it was January 27th, we knew there was something going on up in Seattle. And so with our leadership team, and by that I mean the leadership from the system and all 4 universities, we started having daily calls at 9 o'clock in the morning. We have 2 health-related institutions and 2 general academic institutions. And it worked out beautifully that way because we could get an update every single day on what's the latest information health-wise on things going on, and then how is that applicable to our 4 universities. And so the key for me from a leadership perspective is communication. Regular communication, roundtable communication. So we started every single day. Every day we'd start with a 9 o'clock call with everybody on it, and we would do a roundtable discussion. What's going on at Texas Tech? What's going on at the Health Science Center? El Paso, San Angelo. Walk through it. What have you seen new here? What is it you're doing? What do you see coming? So, for example, on the general academic side, in the 2 universities that are the general academics, they started saying, okay, we're going to have issues with our dorms. We're going to have issues with having to provide refunds for kids that are in dormitories. So you could see those things coming through this roundtable discussion, oftentimes before it really became an issue. I'll tell you the thing that you have to, at certain points with this whole thing, you have to make decisions based on limited data. And I'll give you a great example. We had 105 students study abroad at the time this all was happening. Most of them were in Europe. Most of them were in Spain at a campus that we have in Seville. So we had 105 students that were scattered around the globe, and as the illness became more of a crisis and then a pandemic, when Italy went to high-risk country, Spain, right next door, was still a low-risk country. But we made the decision, we got to get those kids home. And we actually had a lot of pushback. A lot of the students were saying, well, no, we want to stay here, So, well, look, this is an adult decision, and it's going to be made by the adults.
Right.
So we paid to get all of them back.
Yeah.
The next day after that, Spain went to a high-risk country after we'd made the decision to get the kids home. So we got all our students home over the course of the next week. By the end of the next week, we had accounted for all 105 students. The next day after we got that report back, the Inside Higher Ed magazine came out. There were 13,000 requests from American students around the globe trying to get back. Because at this point, President Trump had restricted travel from China, and then he restricted travel from Europe, and then he restricted travel from the UK and Ireland as well. So people were now forced, and they had problems even trying to get back at that point. And at that point, we'd already gotten all of our kids back.
What do you encourage? How many people are in that 9 o'clock meeting, roughly?
About 40.
40?
Yeah.
How do you have a productive, so how do you encourage people to communicate when there are 40 people, limited time, but you need good information to make good decisions? Like, what does that practically look like?
So what we'll do is there are about 40 people that are on these calls during at the 9 o'clock call, but they're having their offline calls for the HSC, for Texas Tech, for San Angelo. So the presidents are speaking at the meeting. So we'll start out, Texas Tech University, what do you have going on? And they'll have a conversation, and you'll hear them. The president will say, okay, we had this. He goes, well, hang on. Now, Noel, how much money was that going to cost? Blah, blah, blah. All right, HSC, And then the president will present, and the president will present. But they're all their support folks are there with them. All their VPs are with them, so that if there's a question, they can write in and say, "Hey, what about this and what about that?" Yeah. We actually even had Midwestern State University joining in on those calls as well. They're an independent university right now. And Stephen F. Austin over in East Texas is joining in on some of those calls as well, simply because as a system, we have a more established government relations program, not just in Austin, but in D.C. as well. So when you have that kind of discussion where the conduit during the discussion are the presidents, and then they will defer back and forth to their vice presidents as they need it. It operates very smoothly.
How do you fight bureaucracy? I don't know you very well at all, but just, listening to you talk, I don't see you being someone who would really tolerate inefficiencies so I'm curious how do you work through that dynamic?
Well, I will tell you this. When I first started, because I'd come from a private system.
Okay.
And coming into a state agency,
right?
And all of a sudden, the wheels slow down with everything. Then you start, we'd be in meetings and people would say, "Oh, well, we can't do that." All right, well, we can't do that. And after a few months of that, it kind of clicked, and I said, "Wait, all right. So when you say we can't do that, do you mean it's violating a federal law or a state law?" We can't do that.
Right.
And most of the time it'd be, well, no, we have an OP, an operational policy about that. Okay, well, hang on. We write those. And so we've got to make sure that we're not stepping on our own toes with this. So if you are working at a state agency, there are obviously state regulations and things that you have to abide by. But you have to make sure that your own internal bureaucracy is not just layering stuff on top of that, because it is there's a tendency, and this is human nature,
sure,
for people to kind of get calcified in the way they think, and nobody likes to change. Nobody likes something different than the way they've done in the past, even if the way they've done it in the past is not the most effective or not the most efficient. So having people understand, and we do this throughout the system, that OPs that you have that get in the way of doing business, you've got to do away with them. The other thing that we did, starting at the Health Sciences Center, we've now done it at the system level, and we've done it at the Health Sciences Center in El Paso, we've established what we call a values-based culture. So at the Health Sciences Center, we have 5,000 employees just at the HSC. And we went through and we had over 120-something meetings with every employee in the entire system. Define or give us a list of 5 values that you would want people to live by here at work. And when we started this, I'm thinking, okay, we're going to have hundreds of things. It actually condensed down really fast. Now, give us a definition. We will come up collectively with what the definition of the value for kind-heartedness, one of the values. Let's define kind-heartedness as we see it. Once we define it, okay, let's give some behaviors that we expect people to have with that value. So as we rolled this thing out a few years ago, we'll sit in meetings and somebody will say, well, hang on. If you look at our beyond service value, we really need to think of this, this, or this. Or if you're thinking of our integrity value, we need to think of this, this, and this. And the fact of the matter is, by really steeping our entire population of students, staff, and faculty in a values-based culture, the fact of the matter is you wouldn't even need a single OP if people lived by those values. And so those are values that will say, I will, if I'm in this institution, you can hold me accountable to those values, and if you're in this institution, I can hold you accountable for them.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
How did you grow in patience? Like when you first started, I'm sure it was a little, so how have you kind of adjusted to that?
This is funny that you say that. My wife and I have this discussion a lot. So the Lord does not give you patience. The Lord gives you opportunities to practice being patient. And that's been it.
And he's giving you an extra heavy dose.
Extra heavy dose all the time.
That's good.
And so what you wind up having to do, you really do wind up having to pick and choose the things that are important and the things that are not important. And as you're well aware, once you start developing any type of enterprise, there are a lot of issues that come up that with just a little bit of benign neglect, they'll go away. And you've got to stay focused on what the real issues are. Because if you, and I think it was Mark Twain that said, no, Winston Churchill said that if you throw a rock at every barking dog that comes along, you'll never get to where you want to go. And so you have to just focus on the things that are the most important, and other things let them go and be patient about them.
Yeah, that's good. How do you manage your time, like real practically speaking? I mean, you run an institution that has lots of employees,
Sure.
a lot of direct reports. You've got government, folks that you're working with. I mean, you just got a lot of stakeholders, alumni, athletic. It was just
Sure, lots
really
of stuff.
large. So how do you approach your time?
I've always been, for whatever reason, pretty good at compartmentalizing stuff. But you get starting back at Cooper when I was in administration in Dallas in this large practice. My wife and I get up early in the morning. We get up at 5. We go work out together, and then the day begins. And yet, when you have good folks in good positions around you, and stay out of their way and let them do their thing, then from my perspective, I think the higher you get up in any organization, the more you have to look at the horizon. And if you can't extricate yourself from the weeds, you can't get done what you need to get done. So along the way, as you go up in an organization, you really do, your focus has to be farther and farther down the road. It's like driving a car. If you're driving a car 5 miles an hour, you can look at the pebbles on the side of the road. But if you're going 60, you'd better be looking way down the road at where you're going. And it's the same thing in any type of administration anywhere. The higher you get up, the more you have to rely upon the folks that are around you. And we've got a great team of people, and many of them I was able to select along the way. And you have to have a confidence in what it is they're doing. And one of the hardest things in leadership is looking for the right place for that person to be. Because if you have somebody that, as an institution or an organization has grown, sometimes it will grow past their capacity to do something. And when people have really good intentions and they're a good part of the family, they just need to be placed in a position where they're going to succeed. Now, there are other folks that as the institution grows, it grows past their capacity to do that, or they don't want to do that. And then you've got to be kind-hearted in the way you help them find something else to do. There's a great presentation that Jack Welch, former CEO of GE, did back in 2000 to his own employees, but he drew this out in a big grid, a 4-square grid. And so he had someone's values on one axis, and he had their performance on the other. So their performance versus their value. So if you look at the folks that are the high performers, high value, they have your values. Of course, those are your A players. You want to do anything to keep them. If you have somebody that's a low performer, low value person, hopefully they were never hired, but that's somebody that is not going to be part of the team. If you have somebody that is a high value person, but they're not performing, they need remediation. They're a great team member. They're just in the wrong place. But Jack Welch said, and I agree, the most dangerous quadrant is the group of people that are the high performers, low value. So these are the folks that, he or she, they're really good at what they do in the lab, or they're really good with what they do in the clinic or in the operating room, or whatever. They're just kind of jerks. Well, that's the most dangerous individual you have, because there's 2 messages. One of the messages is to them. They can get away with whatever they want as long as they're bringing in money or this or that. But the other message is to everybody else, that behavior is allowed. So by making sure that you hold people accountable, that's one of the best ways, I think, of establishing any type of credibility with the rest of your team.
Something I've observed in our conversation is a lot of the questions I've asked you come back to people. So is that intentional? I mean, is that something somewhere along the way you learned about your leadership, that because you run into a lot of leaders where their leadership is about them, their leadership skills, their leadership abilities. And something I'm observing in your answers is you keep referring to other people, even when my question is about you. Is that intentional? I mean, because it seems like a really powerful thing.
No, but if it were just about me, I would not be the chancellor of the system, and I would not be the president at university. I wouldn't have been the president at the clinic. It's one of those things that if you ever start, this is Mark Twain quote, if you ever start thinking you're a person of importance, try to order around another man's dog. You know, and you know, the graveyard is filled with indispensable people. So, I mean, I think that one of the things in life, if you always keep everything other person focused, because at the end of the day, I know good and well that when people want to interview me, they're not wanting to interview Ted Mitchell. They're wanting to interview the Chancellor of Texas Tech. And 20 years from now, there'll be somebody else they're wanting to interview because they're the Chancellor of Texas Tech. And so I'm a steward of that position. And by the same token, if you're trying to accomplish good things for the students that you have, for the research that you're doing, for the services that you're providing, it can't be about you. And if it's about you, you're missing the boat. And you're missing a huge opportunity, number one, to watch how rich it is for interpersonal relationships. But number two, you're missing the boat on your ability to get things done.
That's good. How do you manage your energy? I mean, so like coffee? He just raised his coffee. That's good. No.
You know, this is really, if you ask my wife is far more energetic than I am. I mean, from the time we get up in the morning until the time we go to bed at night, we stay up just late enough to watch the weather report on the news and we go to bed. I think that if you enjoy what you're doing, and if there is a purpose to what you're doing, time flies fast. Time just goes by every day, very, very quickly like that. And I think that you have to be committed to what it is you're doing. Now, one of the things that we do, and we talk about this with our kids, is when you finish high school. I certainly know that when I finished high school, I didn't have a clue about what I wanted to do in life. But that's the point where you have to make decisions. And so whatever it is you're doing, work it hard. And you never know what that leads to in the next step. But whatever, if it's worth you taking some time out of your life to do it, it's worth doing it with all of your energy. And if you take that approach with things, for us, it just clips by really fast. And this whole coronavirus thing has been really eye-opening because on the one hand, it seems like just yesterday that we were talking about March Madness. On the other hand, it seems like that was 10 years ago.
I know.
It's kind of crazy.
It is crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is crazy. How do you stay sharp? How do you stay inspired? Like, how do you learn? Are you an avid reader? Do you listen to podcasts? What do you do to stay really sharp?
I love to read. I love to read, and I actually like paper books. This is terrible. Janet says that one of my best friends is some fellow named Amazon, and so I'm constantly ordering books and things.
Yeah.
And I like reading a variety of different things, a variety of different topics. I try to read things. I obviously try to get other people's perspective on business ideas or on leadership ideas or things of that nature. But I enjoy reading. And I would say that of all the things that I do outside of work, that's the last thing I do at night. I'll be reading a book before I go to bed. So for me, that's the way I keep up. I do listen to a lot of podcasts and things while I'm working out, if I'm working out by myself. But with Janet, when we walk in the morning, obviously, I'm not listening to the podcast. And then
listening to the boss.
Yeah. And then I've got a workout place in our barn in the back. And when I'm out there, what I do is I zone out, and I have a lot of old 70s rock and roll that's playing.
All right, there you go. That's great. All right, my last question for you. I always enjoy asking this question. If you could speak to your younger self, think when you're 20, 30, what advice would you give yourself based on what you know now?
If I could speak to myself back at that age, I would have told myself, you're going to excel at the things you put time and energy into. And those things that are going to be your regrets later in life are not other people's fault. They're your own. And when I think back on my own life, those areas of my life, both professionally and personally and everything else, where I really excelled and did well, it was because I paid attention to it. And those areas where I didn't succeed at something, while at the time I may have complained about it, in reality and in retrospect, at the end of the day, it wasn't a coach, it wasn't this, it was me. I was not willing to put in the time and effort. And so if I were speaking to my younger self, and said, this is a lesson you need to know. The other thing I would do is, my mother died when I was in my 30s. I'd make sure that I'm spending, if I could talk to my younger self, spending more time. As a parent now, I know what it was like. I know what it's like when your kids come home and they immediately want to go spend time with their friends. And I was guilty of that too. And I think I would have taken a few more evenings that I would have stayed at home with my mom and my dad to have supper with them before I took off with my buddies.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for your time. There's so many things you could be doing with it right now, and that you chose to be here with us means a lot to me. So thanks for being a part of it.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Enjoyed it.